Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and I'm back with another one of those how long does it take in Final Fantasy XIV style videos. I've done these before for things like Eureka and the A Realm Reborn MSQ, but today I wanted to tackle a quest series that's just on everyone's lips right now, and that is the Hildibrand quest series. Introduced way back in A Realm Reborn, the quest series has gotten updates and expansions through Heavensward, Stormblood, and finally now in Endwalker. The reason why I'm making this video is because you must have completed all of the Hildibrand quests up to and through patch 6.25 in order to do the new Manderville weapon style quests. These weapons are identical to the Zodiac weapon, the Anima weapon, the Eureka weapon, and the Bozja weapon. It's just a series of quests that will gradually upgrade a weapon throughout the expansion, and they usually have all sorts of cool designs, eventually becoming the best weapon that you can have by the end of the entire quest series. People have been back and forth about whether or not this is a good idea, putting such a steep requirement of so many quests before you could go through and do these new weapons. But I wanted to see how big of a deal it really was. I did all the Hildibrand quest series as they came out through every expansion, and so I didn't really have an up-to-date idea of how long it would take. So I did two things. First, I did all of the Hildibrand quests without doing any cutscene skipping, and also reading all of the dialogue aloud. That includes all the dialogue that happens outside of the cutscenes, so I really took my sweet time with that. Then I decided to do a run through, skipping everything, fast clicking through all the dialogue, insta skipping the cutscenes, quickly teleporting around the map, making sure I get everywhere ASAP. And I just want to compare those results for you and give my thoughts on the whole thing. Now first, let's start with Hildibrand with every cutscene, with saying the dialogue out loud. I guess I'll call it Hildibrand with taking your time. I decided to break these down per expansion, just so I had a full grasp of what was maybe too long, where were the slow parts, where were the fast parts, and the results, they were about as expected. There were a couple of unsurprised things, but let's start with A Realm Reborn. The very first quest was introduced in patch 2.1, and one of the very first things it makes you do is go do a fate. Now, I actually got unlucky and had to wait about 10 minutes for the fate to appear, whereas the second time through, I actually found it instantly. And this was probably the most kind of mindless, time-consuming thing that happened, because the rest of the time through A Realm Reborn, it was just constant, quest, cutscene, quest, cutscene, quest, cutscene. Maybe a trial here or there. There are 3 trials in the A Realm Reborn one that you can unlock, and they're pretty fun trials. I just unsynced them, but besides the point. And each quest took about an hour. Some of them took about an hour and 10, hour 15. It really depended on which patch we were talking about here. And I guess I should say each patch, not each individual quest, because there are quite a few of them. In total, A Realm Reborn with the Fate, with the 3 trials, which I just unsynced, all of the cutscenes, all of the dialogue, and even taking a couple of breaks midstream, took 5.5 hours. This was the one that kind of surprised me the most, because it doesn't really feel like it should take that long, and it doesn't really feel like it did take that long, but it's very indicative of the quest design from back in A Realm Reborn. There's a lot of go here, then go back here, then go back there, then go back here, when realistically that same quest would probably be designed with just an A to B moniker if it were to be released today. You really do feel that when you're going through the A Realm Reborn. So this was by far the longest section, 5.5 hours out of our total. So how does Heavensward and On really stand? Well, the rest is much more straightforward, especially because they leaned away from really having it involved in any sort of content like fates or trials for the most part. Heavensward has no combat sections whatsoever. I think maybe you have to kill an overworld mob or two at some point, but that's pretty much it. And that only took about 2.5 hours. That kind of makes me sad, because replaying through Heavensward Hildy, listen, I remember everything that happened. I never forgot it, but the events themselves are actually kind of sad, and it makes sense given the characters that are present here. But the final 2 cutscenes, I started tearing up a little bit for what's supposed to be a kind of slapstick comedy that isn't for everyone. There's some real heart, and I think that even people who don't like the Hildibrand scenes would probably enjoy the finale of the Heavensward section in particular. And for that, it's only going to take about 2.5 hours, bringing us up to a total of 8 hours with all of the cutscenes. Man, after redoing these, I think Heavensward is my favorite one out of the batch. So that one definitely gets a big thumbs up from me. And I already knew that I liked it before. Another surprise for me was how long these Stormblood quests took. In my mind and my memory, these were the fastest ones. And yet, Stormblood took me 3.5 hours. Now, some of that kind of makes sense. There is one trial, and I did sit there for a few minutes to form a party in the party finder, maybe like 6-7 minutes. But still, these quests were just longer and had a lot more meat to them than I remember them having. Maybe drags on a little bit towards the middle to late section when there's a few, going out to the Ruby Sea and doing a few things there. I think that tacks on a decent bit of time. But still, I was surprised that it took 3.5 hours. It's an okay story quest. It's a little bit more on the humor side of things, and it's different types of humor than even A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, even if it is still very Hildibrand style humor. But this one was okay. I liked it a little bit less than Heavensward and a little bit more overall than A Realm Reborn. Even if the A Realm Reborn quests really tug at the nostalgia strings a little bit more, given the characters and the story that takes place there, I think Stormblood is a much more complete feeling story than A Realm Reborn was. And finally, we get to Endwalker. Also a big surprise. Endwalker took me about an hour to get done, and that's only with the 6.15 quests. So that's really just some running around, some cutscenes, but the cutscenes themselves are quite long and much more animated than a lot of the previous cutscenes, and they do animate the previous ones quite a bit, but you can really see the quality uptick in this one, even if it is still classic Hildibrand. So in total, what does that bring us to? We had 5.5 for Realm Reborn, 2.5 for Heavensward, 3.5 for Stormblood, and 1 hour for Endwalker. That brings us up to a total of 12.5 hours approximately with taking your sweet time. If some of you don't read it out loud or aren't voice acting it for a live stream like I was, it probably cuts off minimum an hour. Plus, I got up and used the restroom and did a few other things around the house in the middle of this. So even of my 12.5 hours, 30 minutes is probably nothing actually happening. But just going to stick to the time it took from the start local time to the end local time. And that's what we end up with. So that's a little bit more of an investment than I initially thought it was if you want to actually see all of the cutscenes. However, I know a lot of you don't want to actually watch the cutscenes. So how long does it take in that case? Well, fortunately for you cutscene skippers out there, or if you're just uninterested in Hildibrand, it does not take long at all to skip all the cutscenes. Pretty much all of Hildibrand is cutscenes. So it only takes just over 2 hours in order to do this with skipping all those cutscenes and going as fast as possible. A Realm Reborn takes about an hour total, took me 57 minutes. Then Heavensward about 25 minutes, Stormblood about 35 minutes, and Endwalker about 10 minutes. I tacked on 5 minutes to my total guesstimate just because, maybe I was off by a couple minutes here or there. So 2 hours, 15 minutes is what I have written down. And that's not bad at all, and it goes pretty quick. Realistically, regardless of whether you're doing it with or without cutscenes, the only major stopping point is the Stormblood trial. While the Fate back in A Realm Reborn might take a little bit to spawn, and there are 3 trials there, a Fate is easy, and unsyncing 3 trials isn't any effort at all. That's not going to be a struggle. There is also a quick little solo fight that you have to do in A Realm Reborn, which takes a couple of minutes as well. But since none of that is in anything after, that's why it goes so much quicker. But Stormblood's trial can't be unsynced and soloed at the moment. So that is probably the biggest stopping point. I actually decided the second time through when I was doing it without cutscenes to just queue into the duty finder, and the queue popped at about 3 to 4 minutes. I think there's just more people doing it right now because the Hildibrand quest series is required and the Manderville weapons are right around the corner. But realistically, if you have an FC, or even if you just want to throw it in the PF for Kugane Ohashi, and you want to unsync it, 3 or 4 people, especially if you're DPS, should be able to just truck through it real quick. You all do your openers, and it'll pretty much end before anything bad even happens. There's really only one major mechanic you need to beat it before, and the odds of you seeing that with 3 or 4 competent people unsynced is just not very likely. The synced party, on the other hand, scared me a little bit at one part. We had quite a few deaths that I was not expecting to happen, but that happens with the duty finder. It is what it is. We pulled through it and we were a-okay. Either way, not that bad of an investment. I'd say that if you were to want to do all the cutscenes, it is pretty steep, because the Evilise quests, which were required for the Bojda ones, that's about 2 or 3 hours, depending on your queue times for the Evilise raids, or the success of clearing the Evilise raid. Sometimes the 24-man queues for that are not very good. But I know people who have waited, like, 30 to 40 minutes for an Evilise queue and then had to take another 30 to 40 minutes just to beat the instance. I also know people who have waited that amount of time for Kugane Ohashi in the Hildibrand quest series. So it really does come down to how long your queues take, or if you can find some FC mates to run these kind of things with to help that out. And if you can't, then you just kind of start tacking on time. It's kind of a tough call. I think it's okay for those of us who've been playing for a long time, but I kind of understand the gripe with it a little bit more after having done it without all the cutscenes. So maybe they should really consider these things a little bit more in the future in terms of what the actual investment is. But I think they probably took into account that if people don't care about Hildibrand, then they probably would skip and it'd only be about a little bit more than 2 hours. And if people did care, then it wasn't an obstacle anyway. So I think if they had that in mind, I think they balanced it around that, and it should turn out okay. But either way, that's up for you to decide. I can't tell you whether or not you like something in the game and whether or not you should. But I can say I liked Hildibrand, and again, those Heavensward quests, definitely worth a relook if you haven't done them in a while. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned. I'll, of course, be doing a guide for the relic stuff, variant criterion, all that stuff next week when it actually hits in patch 6.25. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.